Muy buenos días para todos. Vamos a estar iniciando el panel I denominado Smart Data. Antes de recibir las ponencias de los destacados expositores que nos acompañan, nos gustaría recordarles que es posible seguir la conferencia en Twitter y enterarse de todo lo que está sucediendo en el evento. Además, en la página web de la conferencia www.privacyconference2012.org pueden seguir el minuto a minuto y estar al tanto de todas las novedades. El evento está siendo transmitido en simultáneo a través del sitio de la conferencia y en Adinet TV, por lo tanto también agradecemos a Antel por el soporte de la comunicación. Les rogamos a todos que por favor apaguen sus celulares. Dando comienzo efectivo a nuestro panel I, Smart Data, vamos a contextualizar el mismo, estableciendo que los sistemas inteligentes que combinan sensores y objetos en red con sofisticado análisis de datos colectan y divulgan información de diversa índole con prescindencia de la intervención humana según consignas predeterminadas. Esta tecnología ya se encuentra entre nosotros. Conocer en profundidad su funcionamiento y aplicaciones, discutir la necesidad o no de entregar nuestros datos a una inteligencia artificial y entender las consecuencias jurídicas de esta conducta son algunos de los retos que les proponemos abordar. Tengo el gusto de presentarles a los integrantes de este panel, que estará integrado por el señor Stefano Nolfi, director de investigación del Instituto de Ciencias Cognitivas y Tecnológicas del Consejo Nacional de Investigaciones de Italia, el señor Ken Anderson, asistente del Comisionado de Privacidad de Ontario, el señor Rainer Nirim, socio de Pressmeyer Attorney at Law de Viena, y el señor Noah Lang, vicepresidente de Reputation.org. A su vez, estará dirigido por el señor James Dempsey, vicepresidente de Políticas Públicas del Centro para la Democracia y la Tecnología de los Estados Unidos de Norteamérica, en la posición de moderador.
And get right to the substance. Again, I'm Jim Dempsey with the Center for Democracy and Technology. And the subject of this panel is smart data. And I think this is a very important panel because, of course, we're hearing the word smart used so much today. Obviously, smartphones, other smart devices. At least in English, we speak of the smart grid for the electrical power grid, or smart meters. We also speak about intelligent highways or smart automobiles. And I think this is a term that we will be hearing increasingly over the next decade in terms of the development of technology and in terms of the development of privacy and data protection. So one of the major purposes of this panel is to introduce you to the smart data concept and to talk about other aspects of smart data or smart devices or smart networks. And we're going to begin with a video presentation. Many of you know Anne Kavukian, who's the Information and Privacy Commissioner for Ontario and a leader globally, of course, in privacy and data protection, really one of the moving forces behind the privacy by design concept and one of the real leaders of this entire field. So let me just very briefly yield to Ken Anderson, who is Assistant Commissioner for Privacy and General Counsel of the Information and Privacy Commissioner's Office for Ontario. Ken will introduce the video and we'll take it from there. Ken?
Thank you so much. So what I'm going to do is mainly get out of the way at this point. There's a video which I think you'll enjoy. It has Dr. Kavukian and Dr. George Tomko. Now, Dr. Tomko is an initiator, a creator of a particular smart data concept, which you'll see as both a system and a tool. And we also are very, very fortunate in having Dr. Stefano Nolfi with us as well, who's going to further explain this. And Dr. Nolfi has participated in a particular conference we've had on this in Toronto in May and is continuing to do work in this subject. And I think between the two of us, Dr. Nolfi, we're happy to answer some questions about this very particular system later on. And then we'll of course yield to our co-panelists who will speak about this whole notion of smartness and data in a different way. And I think with that, I'll just get out of the way and we'll go ahead. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Anne Kavukian and I'm the Information and Privacy Commissioner of Ontario, Canada. And I'm so sorry that I can't be there with you live today. I would have loved to have been at the conference, but I'll be at next year's. We're here today, this morning, to talk about smart data. And smart data is this concept of privacy in the future. How we'll be protecting privacy by getting the data to think for themselves. And I'll explain what I mean in a moment. Let me tell you how we got involved in smart data. At the University of Toronto, there's the Identity, Privacy and Security Institute that I chair. And the expert in residence at the Institute at U of T is Dr. George Tomko, and he invented smart data. So he's here to tell you how smart data will work and the concept behind it. You'll be hearing from him shortly. But I wanted to just give you some context as to how we started working together at the University of Toronto on smart data. So we had a symposium, an international symposium that we held at U of T in May of this year, and it was just amazing. We had people from all over the world, from Switzerland and the UK and Scotland and many European countries, of course Canada and the United States, Buenos Aires, and just so many countries were present. It was just brilliant. We had about 150 people, academics, computer scientists, engineers, philosophers, all kinds of brilliant minds, and privacy people, of course. And we were coming together to look at this new form of artificial intelligence, because traditional AI is top-down, meaning you write the code, you tell the program what to do, and it does it. The difference in smart data is that it's bottom-up, by which we mean you try to get the data to think for itself and the program to adapt so that it's actually learning. It's fluid, and context is key. By that I mean, as you know, privacy is all about context. Who better than the user to actually know how they want their data used, depending on the context? The beauty of smart data is that it's the embodiment of privacy by design, which, as you know, has seen a lot of legs in the last year. It was unanimously passed as an international framework for privacy and data protection in Jerusalem by our Assembly of Privacy Commissioners and Data Protection Authorities in 2010. And it's been embedded in the EU regulation on data protection, and it's all over the world. But the reason privacy by design is a very effective tool is that it's proactive and it anticipates the privacy harms and prevents them from happening. What smart data will do, the reason it's the embodiment of PBD, is it takes the obligation, the onus of doing privacy by design, it places it with the individual. The user is the one who's in control. The user knows the context. The user's instructions will basically be reflected in the smart data world. Smart data, the essence of smart data is it consists of virtual agents, cognitive agents that will do as you wish, as you instruct it to do. The data live online, and they reflect the user's preferences as to the use and disclosure of their personal information. But you're going to hear all about that from Dr. George Tomko, who's the brainchild of smart data. So without any further ado, let me turn it over to George, and you'll hear directly what he means by this brilliant new concept.
Smart data. What is smart data? Well, it's a web-based intelligent agent that serves as a proxy for the data subject to control their personal information based on context and the preferences or the needs of the data subject. It's embodied in some form, and we'll talk about why that may be important. It's autonomous and learns from experience. Very important if you're going to have an online agent on you, working on your behalf. It responds correctly to novel situations. Now, that's a tough one. And also will function in a three-dimensional virtual world when that is part of the next web evolution. And that's important because the web will not remain flat. The objective is, as Anne mentioned, to place the user in control at all times. And it's really the next evolution of privacy protection, user centricity. And in my view, and I think in the view of many people, a necessity for the preservation of our freedoms as a society. So my presentation will consist of sort of unpacking the terms on the previous slide such that hopefully I can paint you a picture of what we are trying to develop here. And I'll also outline a research paradigm in which to develop smart data. Now, no doubt what we are trying to achieve is challenging, but it may not be just a one-trick pony. There is a larger payoff. As many of you realize, the ability to achieve contextual processing in an agent is sort of the holy grail of artificial intelligence and would spawn, as you see here, a platform technology way beyond privacy protection. That's the focus of our symposium, and we are fortunate to have many of the scientists, engineers, and philosophers, because they are key here, who have been the pioneers in this field. So what I'm going to do is sort of outline how smart data would work in its environment, provide a model of a map of how it would function, and then some idea about its implementations. So let me start by painting a picture of the first three definitions that I gave. We'll start with a science fantasy. All of you contain information in your head that you want to keep private. So all of you are, in effect, what I'm calling a human version of smart data. Now let's imagine that in this Star Trek-ish, beam me up Scotty sort of way, we could digitize your body and brain into this binary string and then store it in the cloud somewhere. And let's further imagine that when someone has a request for your personal data, they could download that binary string into a cloning machine, and that cloning machine would reconstruct a copy of you or a clone of you. So that reconstructed clone would now be your surrogate and serve as your proxy to represent your privacy interests. So if anybody were to ask that clone for information, they would only give it if the criteria, proper criteria were met. And because it's a clone of you, that would be your criteria. But in addition, we want that clone sort of to hang around, watch what you do with the data, make sure you don't do anything bad, that you don't copy it and send it to somebody that you don't want it to be sent to. But obviously, what I'm talking about here is silly. This technology is just a fantasy. So let's make some substitutions to see if we can get more real, or I should say more virtual. First, substitute the clone with an intelligent agent. That agent is what we are calling smart data. Next, substitute the cloning machine with some type of processor, such that when you download the binary string into such a device, it'll reconfigure it and activate a smart data agent. And that processor can be viewed like, I don't know if some of you in computer science hear von Neumann's a universal constructor, but that's not important. That processor may be some type of reconfigurable computer, and we have, I think, Bob Blaney from IBM who's going to talk about those kinds of things. And those processors may be connected to a USB slot on a PC terminal, or possibly banks of them could reside in the cloud awaiting requests for personal information. Now, it also says on that slide that the data is mixed in with the other information. So let's talk a little bit about security. The personal data will be divided up, possibly anonymized, encrypted, and placed in those lockboxes. And each lockbox will have a non-personal description of its data as an attached meta tag. So you can see there, for example, the lowercase a, b, and c's are the personal data. The uppercase are the meta tags. So you can have a lockbox for MRI data, subscriber data, what have you, as you can see there. These lockboxes will be stored in the clouds. What the agent will store will be the encryption keys, the meta tags, and the meta tags are important because they'll be used later in my talk to determine how we evolve the agents. And we also will store in the smart data agents the IDs. So the next question is, what is smart data going to control? Well, basically, it's going to manage the 4 W's of information rights management. Who is authorized to access the data? What can they do with the data? Can they copy it? Can they distribute it? Etc. When can they access it? Time of day, for example. And from where? From the browser, from the corporate network, or from a network outside? And these are the tasks, as I mentioned, which underlie information rights management. But notice that the smart data binary string would be transmitted or stored, not the personal data itself. There would be no personal data, raw personal data, out in the open. Only anonymous encrypted data would be out there in the cloud. All personal identifiers would be stored within the smart data binary string. Now, there's a security challenge there for us. How do we securely store keys in a neural network type of structure? And although that's not the focus of this symposium, there are some really promising methods out there. One that I came across was such as hiding keys in spin glasses using Hopfield neural nets. And if anybody's interested, I can give you a reference there. So, how does it work? If we have a request, let's say, for a health record, the binary string pertaining to, say, you, if they wanted your information, would be downloaded to the processor. That would reconfigure the processor. The person, the requester, would then ask for the information. And if the criteria for release were satisfied, the information would be sent over to the person wanting the data. The criteria would be based on relevant contextual factors. But comparable to information rights management, only encrypted data would be transmitted to the user. Smart data would house both the key management protocol and the encryption keys to control things like printing, copying to a derivative document, etc. And that's not technology that we have to develop. That's already out there. That's a number of companies already have this kind of information. It just has to be integrated with smart data. Now, with health records, there's also this concept of circle of care, where all those attending to a patient's health should have access to the records. And that could include, for example, emergency wards. But that decision would be based on authorization, obviously authentication, and most importantly, the context of the request, where those kinds of rules for access would be included. Now, although I will present how smart data may function in protecting all aspects of your personal data, all the domains, medical, financial, etc., I believe the best approach may be to develop it for specific applications, specific apps first. As you see here for the mobile application. A person wants a book. They would basically communicate with their smart data agent. The smart data agent would go to the online bookstore, order the book for you, and the book would be sent, and the smart data agent would make sure that your subscriber data, credit card information is kept private and safe, etc.
So I think you can see why smart data is the embodiment of privacy by design. We're calling it a PBD 2.0, if you will, because it just embeds the user's wishes and preferences and their ability to control the data in the data itself through these online virtual agents. It's an amazing work in progress. And stay tuned. At next year's conference, we'll have more to report, and the research will be well underway. I want to thank Dr. Tomko and tell you that Ken Anderson is there with you live. He will take any questions that you may have. And I urge you to explore these future types of formulations like smart data. Because in the future, I really believe that we will need new tools, new innovative, creative ways of thinking in terms of how to protect our privacy. Because the existing systems of regulatory compliance, which are wonderful for the here and now, I think increasingly with the growth of online social media, with Web 2.0, 3.0, mobile devices everywhere, Wi-Fi, I think our ability as regulators to have control over this and exercise the protections of regulatory compliance, I think this is going to be more and more of a fleeting operation. So what better than embedding the necessary protections right in the data itself? Have the data protect itself. Get the data to be smart. Wouldn't that be an amazing accomplishment if we could achieve it? So I look forward to seeing you all at next year's conference. Please enjoy the conference, and I wish you every success.
So, as Anne says, this concept of smart data is an effort to try to achieve what has long been one of the goals of privacy and data protection, which is to create control over the data itself and to use the technology to empower the data subject to control his or her own data. And one of the scientists who is working to make this a reality is our next speaker, Dr. Sinolfi, and as the MC said, he is the research director at the Institute of Cognitive Sciences and Technologies at the National Research Council of Italy, and head there of the Laboratory of Autonomous Robots and Artificial Life. So I will yield now to Dr. Nolfi, and then maybe if there are a few questions about the specifics of smart data as described by Dr. Tomko and then as elaborated by Dr. Nolfi, we can take a couple of questions, go to our other speakers, and then circle back to this concept and see how it relates to actual real-world implementations of user control. So, Stefano, please.
Thank you, Jim. It's a pleasure to be here. So I think that to understand the potentiality of this technology and the functionality that this technology should have, we should start by discussing the user needs. So what I will do is first to discuss the factor that explain why users often do not exhibit privacy-compliant behavior. Then I will discuss the functionality that we want to embed into this kind of technology. And finally, I will briefly discuss the technological feasibility. So let's start by saying that people do not voluntarily give away their personal data. Unnecessary data disclosure rather occur as a consequence of very specific factors. Now, first of this factor is constituted by the fact that humans do not always make rational decisions, in particular when, as in the case of personal data disclosure, the possible negative consequences are likely to happen in the long run and are probabilistic. So from a rational point of view, to secure the maximum benefit in life, all future events, all future pleasure and pains should act upon us with the same force as if they were present, allowance being made for their uncertainty. So time should have, in principle, no influence. However, human minds do not work in this way. Indeed, due to a well-known phenomenon of discounting or delay effect, future feeling is always less influential than present one. This might well lead to a situation in which short-term rewards can allow individuals to accept severe long-term risks. Moreover, another factor to consider is that obviously the benefits of information sharing are usually much more evident than the disadvantages, which tend to become evident later on only when users experience unwanted use of their personal information. The implication of this factor has been clearly demonstrated in an experimental study carried at Humboldt University in Germany that demonstrated how, in the context of online shopping, for example, users easily forget about their privacy concerns and disclose even the most personal data without any compelling reason to do so when benefits are offered in return for information revelation or when the online exchange is entertaining. And this happened also to the users that were highly privacy concerned. A second factor that I would like to discuss is the fact that privacy protecting behavior are, at the current state of the art, very time consuming and cognitive demanding. Operating in a complex environment like the online environment with always new changing computer-based device and tools, it's already demanding, but the additional time and cognitive resources required to use these tools in a privacy-effective manner is unsustainable for most of the users. Yesterday we learned that only to read the privacy consent notice, user will need 76 days per year in principle, and this is only one of the things that a user has to do in order to control his personal data. A third factor is constituted by lack of knowledge. That is the fact that users often are not aware of the amount of their personal data that is collected and on the way in which this data can be analyzed. In principle, this problem might be mitigated by an expected increase in people awareness. But on the other hand, the rapid development of new methods and techniques that enable personal data collection, analysis, and usage will probably vanish this positive effect and ultimately will lead to an increase in the knowledge gap. A fourth and last factor I think is worthwhile discussing is the lack of alternatives. Often, users have little alternative than just to fill out the mandatory field of aware form. In other cases, users are presented with false choice scenarios in which they are asked to choose between privacy or public safety, for example, or between privacy and better customer service. This is a false zero-sum paradigm that rule out the possibility to create positive-sum solution that can deliver both privacy and public safety, both privacy and enhanced customer service. By the way, it is important to stress that this factor produces negative consequences, not only for the users, but also for service providers, since users might act with resentment when they later realize what kind of data has been collected and how this data has been used. So to be effective, we need technologies that can eliminate these factors or can eliminate the consequence of these factors. So the idea, as you see in the video, is that to empower users with technological tool, personal assistant agent. This agent will be software tool installed on the user device that will help the user to have full control over his personal data. So let's now discuss briefly what are the functionality that this technology should have in order to achieve this ambitious goal. So first, I think it's important that they allow the user to adopt a default privacy-protecting behavior. So this means that, for example, when the user accesses to a web service, the personal assistant agent will ensure that the access will be anonymous and unlinkable. In other words, the personal assistant agent will take care of the user identification process and will do it so to minimize personal data disclosure, unless explicitly decided to act differently from the point of view from the user. Second point is that personal assistant agents should be able to significantly reduce the cognitive effort required by the user to control his personal data. This can be realized, for example, by allowing the user to operate in an effective manner on the basis of few and easy to understand metaphor of privacy. For example, we can imagine the user can express to the agent their level of privacy concern with a score level analogous to the security level used by current firewalls. The personal assistant agent will operate accordingly by blocking sensitive data disclosure during phase in which the privacy concern expressed by the user is high. Notice that also that this aspect is important not only from the point of view of usability, but also for making this technology appealing to the user, which in turn is crucial for the adoption and diffusion of this kind of technology. A third functionality consists in allowing users to easily regulate data disclosure behavior in a context-dependent manner, and then start to be more difficult. In the offline world, individuals naturally and spontaneously vary the information they communicate about themselves on the basis of the social sphere in which they operate. That is, whether they are, they behave differently, whether they are in a public office, at work, or at a restaurant, for example. And also, they vary their behavior. People vary this behavior on the basis of the specific activity which is currently carried on. So to enable an analogous process in the online world, personal assistant agents should be able to learn to discriminate different types of contexts in which the user operates, as well as the relationship between context and sensitive data. Finally, a fourth functionality consists in monitoring and providing relevant feedbacks to the user on the ongoing personal and data delivery activity. Easy to realize functionalities that we already find in some existing technologies, such as recording data disclosure events, visualizing the type of data being delivered or recently delivered, can increase user awareness concerning the amount of data collected and the type of data disclosed to each service provider. Eventually, this monitoring function can be expanded by including social sharing of information related to privacy, such as accountability, reputation of service providers, and known data breaches. Sorry. To achieve all this functionality, standard software tools or utilities will not suffice. We need agents able to work together with the user in a cooperative manner, able to learn from the user, and so to become progressively more competent, trustful, and autonomous. I'd like to conclude by briefly discussing whether the realization of this technology is feasible and which are the open challenges that we have in front of us. Now, the development, as we already listened in the video, the development of effective personal assistant agents require the integration of advanced but existing techniques that range from identity management tools, encryption tools, human-machine interface, autonomous agent, and adaptive techniques. So from a technological point of view, the realization of this agent is feasible. On the other hand, the development of effective agents requires to overcome a series of difficult design challenges. One of these challenges is constituted by the need to realize a natural and effective interaction between the user and the agent. This implies discovering and implementing easy-to-understand metaphor of privacy-related concepts, such as privacy level, that however are rich and flexible enough to enable a sufficiently rich human-agent interaction. Another difficult challenge is constituted by the need to translate abstract concepts regulating human-agent interaction into articulated operations. One possible way to do so consists in providing the agent with a built-in behavioral repertoire constituted by several high-level actions that are then translated into a hierarchy of lower-level operations that can be performed automatically. So, for example, the action browse with personalized recommendation might involve a series of operations that allow the user to log on the service provider by using a relationship pseudonym, without the user obviously need to understand what a relationship pseudonym is. Or, for example, the action upload this picture, maybe in my Facebook account, will carry out a series of operations, including the elimination of geolocalization information from the picture, unless explicitly requested from the user. Finally, another crucial challenge is constituted by the need to realize trustful and competent agents. So in that respect, on one side, we need agents that do not incorporate any domain-specific knowledge at the beginning, and therefore are transparent to the user and trustful in a sense. On the other hand, we need agents able to become progressively more competent as the result of the learning process based on the user-agent interaction. So as in the case of a real personal assistant, at the beginning, these agents will not be very familiar with the habits and the preferences of the users. However, they will have an opportunity to learn on the shoulder of the user on every occasion the user take a decision that different from the agent's current policy. Such learning process should enable the agents not only to become progressively more competent, but also to be able to generalize, to take appropriate decision in partially new situations by exploiting previously acquired knowledge. The use of simple learning processes that are transparent for the users, combined with the fact that the agent gradually develops its knowledge as a result of the interaction with the user, is essential for establishing and maintaining a trustful relationship between the user and the agent. The user, in fact, will be able to build over time a model of how the agent behaves, which in turn will allow the user to delegate the agent to operate autonomously in his behalf. So to summarize and to conclude, the development of this technology is technologically feasible. However, on the other hand, the efficacy of this technology will depend to the extent in which we will be able to solve a set of design challenges, including realizing a natural and expressing user-agent interaction, finding easy-to-understand concept to express privacy, finding an appropriate way to map the abstract concept into detailed operations, and designing agents able to progressively become more competent as a result of the interaction with the user, and able to generalize their knowledge to new situations. That's all from my side. Thank you.
Stefano, thank you. There are so many questions that this poses, obviously. It is so attractive to believe that this technology could actually serve the goals of user control. And yet, as we look at this, we see so many questions about how to actually implement this and how to get there, while, of course, at the same time, other developments like smart meter are rushing forward, and yet more and more information is being created and more information systems are being developed and deployed. We could talk at great length, I think, about, for example, what is the relationship between the intelligent agent, this technical control, and the concept of consent. So, as we all know, on the one hand, consent is absolutely critical to privacy, an essential element of the fair information practice principles, and yet at the same time, consent can so easily override all other privacy rights as we consent to uses of data. An interesting question in terms of how you relate consent and the power, the potential destructive power of consent from a privacy perspective, how you relate that to the technical controls. Now, in terms of what are the next steps, Ken, are there, how do you and Dr. Kavoukian and others, how do you see this moving forward?
There's quite a bit of research that's going on, and people are working because it's a multidisciplinary venture. People are working, like Dr. Nolfi, on different parts of the equation. But in this age of big data and transparency, there's very much an interest also in ensuring that lots of people can participate. So, for example, next June in Rome, there is a very large artificial intelligence conference gathering, and it's proposed that inset to this, there will be a major workshop on smart data. And if anybody is interested in, really getting into this beyond the overview, that's a place where you can either watch the proceedings live as it's happening, or in fact take part and insert yourself to it. And Dr. Nolfi, I don't know if you want to say anything about that.
Just a small point. Say that I think there are other technology, and that some of those will be illustrated by the next speaker. That are related to some of the aspects that we discussed. So, I mean, there will be progress. I believe there will be progress in the area from different actors, not only inside this project, and there will be synergies between these projects.
It's a very interesting question about the role, for example, of standards bodies, and then what is the relationship between the data protection authorities and the development of technology, so that we don't want a technology mandate. We don't want to necessarily the data protection authorities prematurely to be blessing one technology over another, but by the same token, there is a role of the regulators in sort of pushing or incentivizing or encouraging the development. And so that's another whole set of questions about what is the relationship between the regulatory mechanisms and the development of technology. Do we have one quick question from the audience, and then we'll go to Noah? But yes, please. Oh, a microphone? Oh, I'm sorry, I had... Well, then we'll do two questions, please.
Yes, in the networking models, there is a several number of layers. I would like to know if this idea of smart data is in the application level, or there is also a work in the, I don't know, the IP protocol, the TCP protocol. That's my question.
I mean, the idea of this technology is basically at user machine interface point of view. So you can imagine this technology as a sort of extension of the operating system of your machine that include additional feature that allow the agent to control more effectively the data disclosure. So there is, of course, there is a lot of interaction with networking protocols, TCP interaction, TCP protocol, and so on. And as well, so that's a how possible metaphor to describe the level in which you will operate.
Please, one in the back.
Thank you. I think this is really interesting research that you're doing. There was similar research funded under the European Commission's 6th Framework Program. Are you familiar? Actually, I have two questions. Are you familiar with that research? I mean, they, as I recall, they used the term sticky data, and the idea was more or less the same, that personal data policies would be effectively attached to the data. So that's one question. Are you familiar with the research that was funded by the European Commission in this same sort of area? And the second question is, I agree with what Jim Dempsey said. It seems to me the real challenge is how do you implement this on a commercial basis? Like, who's going to fund, what service provider, what operator is going to fund or empower the user to do this kind of stuff? I mean, conceptually, I think it's a really interesting idea, but how would it actually work in practice? Who's going to make it happen? Thank you.
There is a lot of related activity at the European level, and in addition of the things that you were mentioning, there is another project called Prime that is still running, which is strongly related to this idea. So basically, it's looking more specifically to the identification process, and do not involve the idea of having personal agents, but rather tools and interface tools for users. But of course, there is a lot of interaction and similarities, and we borrow some of the ideas also from that kind of work. It's running for a long time because this project is there was another one previous, the Prime Life, already starting almost 10 years ago. Regarding your second question, maybe I will leave to the next speaker because he will address this point, if you don't mind.
Exactly. I'm going to yield to Ken for 1 second, but in fact, there are people, and Noah Lang is going to talk about trying to make some of these concepts work as a business model. Ken?
Thank you. Because we've already had some conversation, I wanted to make sure that I jumped in on this part. There's also been work that's been done in Canada and in North America. Part of it was done by a Canadian company that's no longer around. Part of it was done by IBM, in fact, and some others. So yes, we're aware of that work. A lot of the stuff about sticky data and sticky policy and so on was more related to that notion of almost legalistic, where you're looking at routines or laws and then trying to make certain matches. This is the notion where you move away from a security level and you move away from perimeters and frameworks to be absolutely out there with the individual. So think of having your avatar in Second Life, or when you're doing games playing and so on. It's a bit of an out there concept, but it's a little different. Who would do work with this now? Well, I don't want to unfairly mention companies that may not prefer their names to be there yet, but there are major companies that are spending time helping out in this project, including some of the very largest that you could imagine. So there's people already on that way, but I think Noah has some fascinating work coming the other way.
So with that, let's turn to Noah Lang, Senior Business Development Manager at Reputation.com. Noah?
Thank you. So I'm gonna try and put a little bit more context around this. It's a very abstract topic. I think there are clearly open questions as to how long is it going to take us to get to a place where this is a reality. What are the ways in which we're going to do that? What are the industries we're going to see actually marching forward and leading the way? So I'll give one perspective. Rainer will talk about I think an entirely different industry perspective, but also a current implementation of some of these concepts. Just to introduce who I am, Reputation.com is a company based in San Francisco. It's not actually based in Canada, although we work closely with the commissioner. And we've built products over the last 6 years. We were founded in 2006 that give consumers the ability to monitor what's out there, right? To know everything that's exposed about them online, their private data, their reputational data, to control or reel in that data, their exposures, right? So actually to remove information from the web, and then to stop the further collection and dissemination of that data. And we do that in a couple different ways, everything from stopping the current tracking to partnering with massive marketing databases to preemptively opt you out, and then to actually push out, and we've talked a lot about smart data controls, to push out information about you as an individual. We do that in one particular context today, which is around reputation, typically pushing out professional data to make sure you're represented in the right context on the open web. And we look at really what we've built as phase one of the smart data universe. And you heard Dr. Tomko in the video mention the lockbox. That is a necessary piece, or the many lockboxes that need to be layered underneath this smart data technology. And so that's where I'm going to really focus our attention today, is what is the current implementation of that lockbox, what is the data exchange, and where are you going to see it implemented next. So first and foremost, it's been done before, right? So in 1999, Microsoft launched their Microsoft Passport. Very early stage, right? But a technology that was one of these early means of exchanging your data in multiple sites, multiple points, multiple devices, although there were far fewer devices we were using then than we are today. So I just want to address sort of the lessons we learned, 13 years ago when the first piece of technology was launched. So, it's in some ways being in the right time in the right place. So first and foremost, the types of data and the volume of data we as consumers, we as individuals, were exchanging then, it was far smaller. It was a far smaller sort of nugget of our lives, and far less interesting data points about who we were. We were actually engaging a lot less often. We weren't engaging on our phones. We were being not really behaviorally tracked. Right? There was just far fewer pieces of data to string together in this lockbox and under a sort of smart data exchange layer. There was no consumer trust. Right? So one of the things that we've learned as a company at Reputation.com is you've got to establish consumer trust if you want there to be some sort of exchange. Right? For me to actually give you my data and let your smart data layer control it, we've got to establish trust. And you can do that by demonstrating the ability to remove data or demonstrating some value to the consumer. But there's got to be trust established, and there never really was with Passport. Nuanced data set, right? So there has to be some interesting piece of data. Right? A lot of the data we're exchanging under the Passport program is very similar to what we might have in an offline marketing database or some pre-existing database that doesn't really make use of the compelling, interesting data you can collect in a digital universe. A lack of scale, right? So when you look at how we're going to get to that place where there's a smart data layer, there has to be infrastructure built. And in order for there to be infrastructure built, there either have to be massive numbers of consumers over here participating, or there have to be massive and interesting numbers of companies over here participating. And it's a little bit of a chicken and an egg. Right? One has to come before the other. And scale, we think, is one of the most important pieces there, is getting massive participation so that there is a reason to maintain and build infrastructure. And then lastly, and this is what I'll sort of close up with, is there's a lack of a self-sustaining business. There's a lack of a self-sustaining market there. And this ties in with the whole discussion. I think that I've heard this theme in every single panel I've attended this week, which is there's a sort of regulatory policy entry point. There's a self-regulatory entry point, and then there is this third way, which is a market-based solution for some of these problems. We heard Peter Scharf from Germany yesterday say, if anyone attended the geolocation panel, he said, we've got to rely on the platforms to make it easier for consumers to control their data. We can't simply rely on regulatory policy. And so that's what we believe in, and we believe that there's actually a business to be built around that, and there are current market drivers to making that happen. So what's the first step? It's got to be that, and I think Dr. Tomko mentioned this as well, that he said there's no raw personal data in the open. There's only encrypted data that exists out there. And for us to get to a place where smart data is a necessary and is an active piece of our lives, we've got to clean up the mess we're in now, right? There has to be demand created for that data so that the companies over here participate in that exchange. Today we're in an ecosystem that's built on top of the sale of the individual, right? Massive multi-billion-dollar markets represented by some of the companies that are here today are built on the sale of the individual. Offline data, online data, the merging of those data points. The government is also somewhat responsible. So here's an area where there may be some regulatory policy. The U.S. government is actually a bit more open, I think, than most European and other governments in this regard, which is our governments are releasing data about us, whether it's tax data or home purchase data or marriage and divorce record data, into this ecosystem, exposing individual consumers and their privacy. Identified online consumer data, identified offline or retail consumer data. I'm not sure if anyone saw the recent story about Facebook partnering with a company called Datalogix. So they can tie your offline retail purchases to your online browsing on Facebook and the ads that you've seen. And all of these things are being strung together, and we've got to stop that data leakage for there to be a sort of a market demand created here for the companies. It's also applicable in areas like health data, transactional data. There's current data leakage. We think most of this can be stopped with technology. Some of it, like the government collection and release of data, will require some policy changes. Okay, so at a high level, what are the key necessary pieces? Data, right? Of course, data. And we look at, there's three different kinds of data. There's volunteer data. You can think of this as the social networking profiles you've created today, your LinkedIn profile, your Facebook profile, the data that individuals are actually creating and logging about themselves. There's observed data, right? So this is captured via the sort of recording of the actions of individuals. This can be mobile location data. And then there's inferred data, which the sort of current implementation, I think most of us are familiar with inferred data might be credit scores, right? Watching your transactional data points, your string of transactions, and generating a score based on that, making an inference based on that string of data. Professor Nolfi mentioned that we've got to have agents that learn on the shoulders of the users, right? That's a combination of the observed data and then the inference is made off of that. Insight, right? So to get the companies involved that are going to be engaging with these consumers, you've got to have insightful data, right? It's got to add some value in order to create those multiples that will create this personal data economy. And then lastly, contracts and permissions, right? Again, back to trust, back to context, the most important pieces of this whole conversation for the consumer, which is there has to be some explicit permissioning of data. We've talked about, Dr. Tomko mentioned encrypted keys, meta tags, data IDs, key management protocols, right? Those are the things that he's talking about here. I'll try to make that a little bit more tangible for you as well. All right, so what I'd like to do here is just talk about, I talked about those two different parties, right? You've got the consumers and the businesses that are going to engage with their data. What are the necessary pieces for us to get there with each of those parties? So for consumers, it's first and foremost fax access to a copy of your data. We've seen company after company after company slip up on this in the past. So the most recent example is in our current data ecosystem, Axiom. A writer by the name of Natasha Singer from the New York Times requested a copy of her data under their policies, and Axiom was unable to provide that data in a timely manner, first and foremost, and then in a complete manner, secondly. It literally took months for her to get a copy of what data was owned about her, was controlled about her. Secondly, demonstrated control and trust with the consumer. I've mentioned this several times. It's because it's the most important piece here. To give you a tangible example here, Reputation.com partnered with the Direct Marketing Association, which in the United States controls 80% plus of the direct mail you receive, right? The coupons, mail from nonprofits, catalogs from Williams-Sonoma, the things you receive in your mailbox. Many digital marketers are also members of the DMA. We partnered to give our users more control over how their data is used by those marketers. Pairing that in context with the exposure of someone's data online, like on a site like Spokeo or Intellius, we could demonstrate our ability to go out and remove, literally in seconds, in near real time, through technology and partnerships, the ability to remove that data from a website. And when we paired that with giving a consumer choices to opt into or opt out of marketing from the DMA's members, we found that if we demonstrated that ability to remove, the customer was 10 times more likely 10 times more likely to give data back to the marketing ecosystem, to opt in and say, I actually want these particular companies to contact me. Right, so that's a huge value multiple that we've created by first demonstrating control, demonstrating trust, demonstrating the ability to pull back your data, and that's one of the key pieces of the smart data ecosystem: is never fully release it, encrypt that data, never release it open raw into the wild. And then lastly, there have to be clear benefits, and again, context. Right, there has to be some real, almost cash value creation here for the consumers. Today, we deliver this in what sort of we'll call privacy body armor for the web, right? We're protecting you as you browse the web to stop the collection of your data and remove what's out there. That's the value creation chain for giving us your social data, for giving us your browsing data, for giving us the ability to look for additional data points about you online and collect a full and complete profile in your personal data vault. There will be cash benefits. There will be status benefits. Right? You can think of sort of the American Express black card level status, but based on the data that you exchange, based on the things that can be learned about you as an individual and that data. All right, so the other side of this picture, how do we get the businesses to participate? This is marketers. This is transactional. This is our current sort of very large data warehouse, data aggregator companies. One of the most important pieces is demonstrating a reduction in exposure, right? So we take this data from massive, massive data warehouses, and we put it in the hands of the consumer. You put the risk in the hands of the consumer and in the platform players that are building smart data exchanges. You dramatically reduce the risk and probably thereby the insurance premiums of these large organizations. Last year, the average cost for data exposure, if there was a data breach, every record costs on average $214 to that company through insurance, through protection they then had to offer to the consumers, and also through PR mitigation. Accuracy, quality, and timeliness, right? So we've got the consumer engaging directly, you get much better data, right? If I, as an individual, am willing to tell you when I'm in the market for a new car or a mortgage, I can do that in a much more timely fashion than, say, a behavioral tracker who's trying to make that decision based on the sites that I'm looking at, right? Or the fact that lendingtree.com has collected me as a lead and then has resold me for $1,500 to a number of mortgage lenders. I can also tell you when I'm no longer in that market, right? So you, as a lead purchaser, no longer buy me, right? Hugely, hugely valuable, especially if you look at markets like the mortgage, where someone might pay $1,000, $1,500 for a good lead in that market. And you can do that with autonomous smart data management. I engage, I let you track me, I let you make inferences, but I, as a consumer, can opt into and out of those inferences and tell you when they're right and when they're wrong. Unlock new sources of data. So here's an area where we've got current regulatory markets creating demand. If you look at financial institutions and you look at telecommunications, two heavily regulated industries, particularly when it comes to personal data, very, very difficult to unlock that data unless you put it in the hands of consumers. So you look at the Open Identity Exchange, which AT&T, Orange, Swisscom, Verizon, they're all contributing to the Open Identity Exchange to try to figure this problem out, is how do I put this data in the hands of my customers, which creates two value points there. It creates value for the ISP or the telecom, because they then have a way to monetize the data through the user. And you've got the user releasing new data out to the rest of the market as well. So it unlocks new sources of data under current regulation. And lastly, there's got to be massive scale. I've talked about this already. There have to be millions of consumers participating. We have a platform today where we have over 2 million consumers using our products to monitor and manage their personal data. All right, so just to review the key points here, right? The keys to driving adoption on both sides: user sharing, right? Give the users a compelling way to share their data. This has to be easy. Professor Nolfi said it has to reduce cognitive effort. That's spot on. I say stupid simple, right? You've got to make it easy for me to put my data into that vault, whether it's giving me some GPS means or an app to track it, or it's going out and proactively collecting that data from my current digital footprint. Make it easy for me as a consumer, much more likely to participate. It's got to create user value. There should be some monetary or near monetary value. It's got to create market value and return on investment. There's got to be ease and efficiency. And there's got to be a decreased risk-based cost of doing business. So my time, I think, is up, but this creates a self-sustaining business where you're generating value for the consumer, you're generating new value off of new data points and reduced risk for the marketplace, and you can provide quantum leaps in terms of the intelligence and learnings off of this data. So there are a number of organizations actively building in this space, from Open Identity Exchange, who I just mentioned, who has some of the key telecoms and FIs and ISPs participating. Personal Data Ecosystem Consortium, I'd recommend you all looking at. It's about 30 companies. We're one of them. Fairly small companies for the most part, building the different layers. We talked about the multi-layer approach, building the different layers that are going to be necessary to succeed here. And then you've got OASIS and OAuth creating basically the standards and protocols for that ecosystem.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Noah. Let's immediately turn to our final speaker. Dr. Rainier Knierim is an attorney, a partner at the Presselmeyer law firm in Vienna. He's an expert in various aspects of data protection law, IT, telecommunications, e-commerce law, and he's been very deeply involved in the development of the rules around implementation of smart meters, or what we call in the US the smart grid, which is this much more granular collection of energy data with all the benefits that it offers for energy management, for environmental purposes, for consumer empowerment purposes, but obviously also with significant privacy issues. So, Rainier, please.
Can you hear me? Yes. So I'm giving you a practical example on the possible use of smart data from a smart metering device and the legal question it triggers. And I thought I will start with some pictures from outside, because we have been sitting here inside all the time. And so I wanted to show you this very nice romantic wine area in the outskirts of Vienna, Austria, where I come from. It's a small town, centuries old, totally smart meter free. Doesn't mean they didn't have smart devices. They have this Twitter tower in the middle you see on the picture. It's a church tower that twittered like when there were marriages, and it twittered when someone was buried and when there was a fire. So they already had some smart devices, but worked offline. Now we are in the online world. And the reason why I tell you this is a problem that they don't have online devices, because if you build a house there in 2012, it's very engineered. They pour thousands of liters of liquid floors create in here. You see this when a house is constructed, and it makes the inside very humid. And if you build the house in winter, it starts really to drop from the ceiling. It's like in the tropics. And it might be freezing in the winter. So what you need is provisional heating. So I was building this house, and I had to put 3 times 9,000 watt heaters. These small electrical heaters are very powerful. So I had running 27,000 watts to keep the house from freezing. It would have been enough to just keep the house at like below zero with 5 degrees. But the workers just loved the heaters. They came in the morning and really switched them on very warm to have 20 degrees there, and even during the night they had one heater switched on from time to time to have warm clothing in the morning. So the result for me was after 41 days, I was building the house, an energy bill of more than 2,000 euros. And in Austria, the system is that on the basis of the first consumptions, the energy company forecasts your annual consumption, which in my case would have been 20,000 euros. I think that's about 28,000 US dollars, or I looked it up yesterday, it's 500,000 Uruguayan pesos. So it's a lot of money they wanted from me, and they sent me this bill, and I was like really shocked because this would be an average salary in Austria, this money. So I would really have loved to have a smart metering device in the house, but as I told you, this village is still smart metering free. I'm now the first person who really signed up for getting a smart metering. So this is how you create consumer demand. The issue is the European Union wants to introduce smart meters for every household that measures energy consumption every 15 minutes. In Austria, we have already a legal obligation to introduce this. So grid operators in Austria are obliged to introduce smart metering quite in near future. In 2015 already, they need to cover 10% of all the customers. And by end of 2019, nearly 100% coverage is required. So the thing is proceeding quite fast, and the companies are really starting the discussion how to introduce it. So go back to my picture example. If I had had a smart meter in the house, could I use the data in the house which was collected by the smart meter? So this puts us to the question, if you have a smart device, the data is collected for a certain purpose in the smart device. And now in my case, I'm trying to use or abuse this data for a total different purpose. I want to prove something in court. Under Austrian civil procedural law, it wouldn't really be a problem to put this in a trial where I go to the building company saying I want to have my energy bill back because your workers abused my electric heaters, and I could show with a 15-meter record that they put up the heating in the morning and in the evening put it lower or put it off, and I could have proved that. And in Austrian court, they would take this issue as a proof, and I could win this trial, but there might be a data protection question, because in Austrian data protection law, and I think the principle will be quite similar in other privacy laws in the world, it says that data may be used if it is necessary for the establishment, exercise, or defense of legal claims of the controller before a public authority, and if the data were collected legitimately. So we could say public authority or a court would be similar. But the question is, who is the controller? Am I the controller? Or is it the network, the distribution system operator? Or is it the consumer? If it is the network operator, then it would be another purpose than energy control I'm using the data for. So is the question, is the data collected legitimately? This controller question gets very important. We have discussions in Austria, like a typical situation in Austria is that if children go for university for studying, they either go to a university campus or the parents rent a flat for them in the city where they're going for university. So the parents rent the flat and the children live there in the flat, and from the energy consumption they would be seeing that they're not studying, but that they are partying and coming home very late and standing up in the morning very late. So this is a control tool. And it's the question, who is the controller? The father who pays the bill, or the son who doesn't study and just sleeps all the morning and is not on university? So this puts us really in legal questions now. Yeah? So it's a question of the role model in the future smart grid market. Who is the controller? Who is the processor? Who is responsible for that? Yeah. So this brings us to a more broad question to the question who might be interested in such data. In the example of smart metering, it could be the landlord who wants to prove that the flat is not used and terminates the lease, which is an important, very important legal question in Austria, because after World War II, many rents were frozen and still people in Austria pay the same rent as at the ending of World War II, and you can inherit this rent to your children, and this has been done through 2-3 generations now. But if you don't use the flat, they can throw you out, and then they can make the rents higher. So this is a question about big money. Or it might be the advertising industry, or it might be the tax authority assessing where you really live and where you have to pay your taxes. Are you really living in the Bermudas or in Switzerland or in Austria? So this is an important question. And of course, criminal investigation for crime intelligence. CSI smart meters. You have got a crime scheme and the police wants to get into smart metering data. So legal limitation of data usage should be thought about when using smart meters and when using smart devices. I've been involved in the EU task force on smart grid since 2009. I was asked by the Austrian network industry to represent them in privacy question there, and yeah, we were quite working on these issues, and I put you here a link where you can download some expert papers which we drafted there, and the work is still going on, so there will be some more papers on that website. And quite interesting to see, one of the main issues we get into is privacy by design and by default. This is a typical question that arises when using this technique. And seeing the EU privacy regulation, which is in draft now, which speaks about privacy impact assessment. So this will be a big issue in the future as well. You can look at this next link to see some more information about the Commission. There is a recommendation paper since March on the introduction of smart meters to see the ideas which they have about this technology. In the discussion I saw, it showed that some basic questions pop up again and again that need to be solved to make something useful and not harmful out of the technique. And some of these questions are, what is the purpose and goal of this technique? What is the legal basis to implement the technique? Who will be responsible? Who will be the responsible data controller? The energy operator, the father, the son? How will be data collected, and what data will be stored? How long in the phase of the data collection? So, what data is in the device or in the place where the data is collected, and then which data will be taken from there and used in other places? Who shall have access to the data? And who else might want to get access to the data for other purposes than initially intended, and would this be okay? If it's not okay, how could this be prevented from a technical and legal side? And what's the technical risk and the potential hacker scenario at introducing such a technique? What is the risk for the society? So these questions pop up and pop up again in the discussions and really need to be discussed through. Just to show you how it's going to be implemented from the technical side in Austria, I've put you some technical information from a regulation which we have since nearly a year now in Austria, which says that smart meters should collect this energy every 15 minutes, should storage the data in the device 60 days, should transfer it just once per day until the following noon, should enable bidirectional communication, and communication with external devices must be necessary. Encryption, of course, is required. And the most interesting thing is that at the very end of this regulation it says meters need to be designed taking into consideration the provisions of the Weight and Measurement Act and the Data Protection Act. So this is a bit pushing the problem to the operators and to the industry, not solving the problem itself. Just, okay, we are telling you how this should work, but the data protection side, it's up to you to design these features in there. So the privacy design should be done by the industry. So I'm not always happy about this solution to put the problem on the industry. They should solve it themselves on the legal side. Yeah, and to show you some examples, because Stefano talked about the privacy complaint behaviors, and in Austria we are already seeing complaints. Like here, this is an example of a public petition of leaseholder association against smart metering in Austria. They just put an online petition. I think in a few days it were like 4,000 people signing this petition, saying we don't want these smart meters, we don't want this stable technology, it's bad technology. There is so much risk about it. Just say no to it. And they put this online, and really many people signed up in a few days. And this is, if you want to read something, it's quite an interesting book about a blackout in an energy network caused by failure of the IT systems, which shows that probably network energy security is one of the future subjects of the public fear. The title of the book is When Progress Becomes Our Fate. I think that's an interesting title. So for that, the light be with us. Thank you.
Rainer, if you could go back, to the slide where you had the list of questions, because it seems to me that those illustrate basically. I look at those questions and I basically see the fair information practice principles. What is the purpose of the collection? How much is being collected? How long is it being retained for? So you go through. Collection limit, purpose specification, retention limit, security, etc.
So I'm just blocked. Can you?
Oh, okay. If you can do it, that'd be great. The Center for Democracy and Technology worked extensively several years ago on smart meter implementation in California. In the U.S. system, this is left up largely to the individual states. And we actually presented a list of questions to the Public Utility Commission that looked exactly like this list of questions. And based upon them, the Commission developed a set of rules. I think the issue which we probably did not fully confront, and in a way which is the issue for our panel, is how do you take the rules, the answers to these questions, as you design your policy, and then how do you translate the rules into the technology? And is the potential for the technology to actually answer these questions for any given set of data, for any given application? Ken?
Thank you. We had an advantage in Ontario, in Canada, because the government chose, unlike some places, where you make a choice, do you want to move to this system or not? The government said, we are doing this, and it's a fact. So we actually have smart meters widely deployed. And smart meters are part of a smart grid system. So they're only one part of a very large story. So our commissioner, Dr. Ann Cavoukian, who is here today talking about smart data, but she also is famous for privacy by design. That's our mantra. And what we did was we worked with the engineers in the hydroelectric companies to actually find ways to build privacy in, starting with the fact that unlike what you talked about, Rainer, with the meter itself would hold information for 60 days, we wouldn't do that at all. It's transmitted automatically and then kept in a very secure central location with a whole set of parameters around that. But how we drove it down, more particularly to your question, Jim, was we actually worked with the engineers and the use case scenarios and did it like project management. And we said, we'll take each of the privacy values and each of the use case scenarios, and they use thousands of them as they build the system, and we'll set up privacy values. And people are often saying, well, privacy by design, that's all great, but it's way up here, and my privacy, Noah, is way down there, right? I have to do this very concrete work. Well, we actually set it up in metrics, so you had to deliver the privacy through measurable outputs, including, in some cases, numerical values. And we've got a lot about that online. We have one of several papers on this, which is outside at a little table as you're going back out for coffee. Thank you.
A question or two from the audience, please. I wonder if one of the panelists wants to comment, Stefano or Noah. Again, one of the implementation challenges seems to me when you look at smart meters, for example, it turns out that there are so many different potential applications for the data and so many potential users. So there's the utility, there's the regulatory body, there may be the developers of energy efficient appliances, there may be the people who would insulate your house, who could use this information. So again, you have very granular data and multiple users of the data. And it seems to me that the question is ensuring that all of the copies of the data and all of the uses are encompassed within the smart data or personal data system control. Noah, do you want to comment a little bit about how you see that emerging so that it's not just one copy of the data, but all the copies of the data that are being controlled?
Yeah, so the way that we view that today, and I think Stefano mentioned this as well, is by not necessarily copying the data, right? Keeping it all in one place and allowing access points. And part of that is going to be, teaching that system to be autonomous over time by watching the access points, watching whom you as an individual allow to access your data set. And I think you could, there are certain transactional data points like the insulators in your home, and when there are rules set up as to when those individuals or those businesses can access your data. But I think the key has to be not allowing that data to leave your store, right? Not allowing it to be reproduced, or at least not without some authentication type of a key. But it's certainly, that I think is one of the toughest problems to solve here.
Questions or comments from the audience? Please.
Rainer, you said that there was some opposition. I've forgotten exactly who you said was opposed to the technology, but I'm wondering, are they really opposed to the smart metering technology, or are they concerned about the way the data would be used or stored or collected, or who would have access to the data? So, that's sort of part A. And part B is, I wonder if having some kind of stakeholder consultation might be a way of addressing the kinds of concerns or the questions that you've raised here.
The fear is on both sides. The people seem to fear that their data may be abused for some other purposes, and that just someone else out there could be knowing something about that. And the discussion is a bit problematic in the German-speaking countries, because there was one university in Germany doing a test with a smart metering, which was on the market, built in a house. They took it out from it, and they found out that this meter doesn't read in 15-minute intervals, but in milliseconds. And from that, they could really find out the TV program the people are watching, and they put this in a press conference. And since then, every journalist is citing this study, which is problematic, because we are talking about 15 minutes, and this study was talking about millisecond measurement. So you will need always in the public discussion correct journalists and saying, this was a different study, we're talking about other things. So this is one part of it. The second part of it is, I think, more and more really the fear of a hacker scenario, that people hack into the system and just really turn off whole countries, or at least cities, in putting in a virus. And of course, yes, there are discussions with the stakeholders, both on the EU level as well as on the Austrian level. Interesting thing, when we in one of the stakeholder discussion rounds, we invited the head of this landlord association, And we found out that she really hasn't had a real clue about what she was doing there in her campaign. She was a lady, and then she confessed saying she's just doing the campaign because she wants to get something done in a complete different subject. So it was just a political showing power off in one place where she could really win public attention to get something somewhere else. So it wasn't even related to this discussion. She just took the subject to get public attention. Yeah.
Ken.
Thank you. David, I think I'm in awe of people like Noah and Rainer who want to take today's problems and move through them, because it's very, very difficult to do that work. I think something that people often hope for when they come to events on smart data, and there have only been a few of them, is to also hear about that next great leap. So in the same way that we say there's areas of the world that have never had landlines and suddenly they're all using mobile, is there going to be a leap with smart data? And we think centrally that yes, there may very well be. And so although today, you know, the study in Europe for ID management talked a lot about what Noah said, there's all that inferred work and all this profiling. It's not about just what you put out there, it's what we all create about each other. Well, we foresee a world of great fancy, I guess, where in fact children that are born in the future, not us, we're stuck in this old morass, but children born in the future will actually be born into a system where they will not be able to be profiled by others in that way, and their identity will still be controlled by them. There's many ways forward. It's a very long story which we couldn't do now, but it's absolutely fascinating. It's the stuff of sci-fi, and yet we actually see that perhaps happening in 20 to 30 years. So if you come to any of these smart data conferences, they're really a lot of fun, and I think great hope for the future.
We've been down this road before. I think it was Noah who mentioned Microsoft Passport, which was in a way an early effort to create a lockbox for data. Those of you with really long memories will remember P3P, the platform for privacy preferences, which was an effort to try to build technical code that would represent user preferences for the use of their data. Ari Schwartz, formerly of CDT, has a paper online about the lessons of P3P, something that anybody should look at in terms of why P3P failed, but what we can learn from it in terms of using technology to implement user control. I think the fact that it's been tried and failed in the past, I think, doesn't mean we shouldn't try to get it right again. There have been obviously multiple ideas in the history of technology that took time to mature, and it may be that we're finally reaching the point where this notion of user control embedded in the code, embedded in the technology, can become a reality. It takes a lot of hard work. With that, I will bring this panel to a close. I think there's a coffee break available now. The speakers obviously are available for further dialogue, and a lot more material available online. So join me in thanking the panelists, and look forward to continuing the discussion around coffee.